Well, I want to talk about Iran. Not interestingly being talked about at the Grammys last night. They were all far too happy, sort of just defending foreign criminals on US soil. Not really that bothered about what's happening to the thousands of innocent people on the streets of Iran who are getting shot dead by their own government. Where are we with Iran? Are the protests still going on? And is any of the talk that Donald Trump is, his sabre-rattling at Iran over nuclear deals, is any of that at all related to saving those people from being killed?
Well, it's a really good question, Julia. So the protests themselves have somewhat died down now, unfortunately, because of the overwhelming force used by the regime. I mean, some estimates have it hitting close to 40,000 people killed in a very short period of time by their own government. I mean, this is an extraordinary death toll. Even if that wasn't the toll, we know that thousands have been killed.
Tens of thousands.
And it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. Now, the question is, what is Donald Trump doing? He's moved all this force to the region. He's got aircraft carriers, he's got planes, he's got missiles. He's got all sorts of abilities if he wants to do that to move things out. But we've heard rumours that there's going to be some deal worked out now. Well, your guess is as good as mine as to what that deal would look like. If it isn't an absolute, number one, destruction of the nuclear program, promise never to start it again, and of course we know they lie and cheat, so how does that work in practice? If that's not on the table, if number two, they don't promise to stop killing their people, which they will do because that's what they've done so far, I'm struggling to understand what deal there will be.
Well, again, but you can't remember. I mean, again, there's the failings. A brilliant deal that he did over Gaza and got the hostages back. All credit to Donald Trump for that. But the failings of a lot of these deals, like Hamas still in charge, wanting to be the police force for Gaza, not quite what the deal was, and these things sort of slipping away. But this is it. We've got a lot of saber rattling from Donald Trump. My big beautiful armada, and we've got saber rattling from the Ayatollah and his representatives back. Is there any room for manoeuvre there? I mean, they know in Iran that they have to keep nuclear weapons. But I first think a lot of us find strange. Thought Donald Trump claimed that last year he destroyed Iran's nuclear capability, but clearly he didn't.
Well, here's the thing. So he would have destroyed the capability in the sense of having pushed it back from any imminence.
Yeah.
But Iran would have immediately gone, right, let's start again. And the trouble is you can't unlearn what's been learned.
Yeah.
So
and we think they'd actually removed some uranium, in the days before the bombing of that mountain.
Yeah, but we're 6 months on. So here's the point: is 6 months on with a committed regime that wants to develop nuclear weapons. It's going to have pumped a lot into it. So the reality is that, until you remove the regime, you're always going to have to do the so-called the mowing the grass theory, which is the grass gets tall, you mow it, with air raids, whatever, and then you've got to come back in and do it again and again and again and again. Because the reality is this regime will not stop. It will keep on trying to develop nuclear weapons until it gets one, or until it gets its way in other ways. So the essential problem is the regime. It's always been the regime. There's a golden opportunity to remove the regime. President Trump, please remove the regime. Yeah,
but that's the thing. And they've made so many threats to their neighbours, to Israel, to America, to Britain. I mean, it'd be totally justifiable. I've got no issue with that. Whether the Russians or the Chinese agree with it, I think it's neither here nor there. But this is the thing. A lot of people say, what's it got to do with us? They want a nuclear weapon to protect themselves. No, and they threaten there'll be a regional war. Every other Arab state is absolutely thrilled when Israel in the past and then America have basically taken out their nuclear capability. They are the problem in the Middle East. They are the biggest issue, basically funding terrorist groups around the whole of the Middle East, sending them to Europe and elsewhere. They are a threat to our allies, to us, and to their own people. I mean, what's not to like? But again, no mention from the celebrities in America.
Well, they're not going to pay any attention to this because it doesn't hit their buzzwords, which is, if it's got Trump or Israel in it, those are the only things they're interested in pushing on that basis. But rarely has a cause come to mind that has more effectively married a strategic and moral reason for doing action. And you were quite right to point out this would transform the region. You remove this regime, all the Arab states will be delighted. You have, Israel will be delighted. Our sort of alliance system, broader alliance system, would be delighted. We'd have no nuclear threat. We'd have no terrorist threat. It would be a transformative moment, and it would actually damage the Chinese and the Russians because it's one of their allies, and The Chinese have been engaged in the oil.
Part of their axis of evil. And yet here we are, even though it's in everyone's interest, particularly those poor innocent people just wanting to live in a free democracy in their own country. Yet on the streets of London, yet again, the pro-Palestinian march, well, this became a pro-Iranian mullah march on Saturday, with people carrying the Iranian regime flag. There were people doing Nazi salutes, there were people with placards supporting the Ayatollah. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing that people could be marching in favour of an Islamist fundamentalist regime that wants everyone in Britain to be dead, and America and Israel, and is shooting its own people.
Well, it is mind-blowing, but unfortunately, here we are. Here we are in 2026 when it's happening. And look, we've known, Julia, haven't we, for some time that this has been on the cards. We've known what these people are really about. They weren't about anything to do with pro-Palestinianism. They are about trying to destroy the West, including this country. We have fifth columnists in this country who want to destroy our society, our culture, our way of life. And they will seize on any tool, including the Ayatollah, in order to do it. We know where their loyalties are. We know where our loyalties are. It's about time we took out the trash, frankly, and started clearing these people from this country.
Right now, let's talk about, well, whether everyone is entitled to go or not to go to the countryside. Some people may choose a lovely weekend or a week's holiday in the countryside, say in the Cotswolds or in the Chilterns. Others may not. Has this got anything to do with people's skin colour? Because apparently, according to those folk who are apparently in charge of rural areas, it does. And officials in rural areas, including the Chilterns and the Cotswolds, have pledged to attract more minorities under plans drawn up by the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, that's DEFRA. This follows their government reports that have claimed that the countryside would become irrelevant in a multicultural society, as it was a white environment principally enjoyed by the white middle class. And National Landscapes, which basically protects areas of outstanding natural beauty, and their local councils have committed to diversity targets to attract more people of colour, and indeed specifically more Muslims to certain areas. It's absolutely mad and bonkers, but let's talk about this with Tim Bonner. He's Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Tim, good morning. Oh, sorry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I think this is terrible because we're both white. How dare we both be both white in a country that's 90% white, talking about it. I quite like the countryside, British countryside, absolutely stunning, green rolling hills. Surely there aren't signs up saying, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Remember those awful signs outside pubs and shops, but way back, 70 years ago. Surely there aren't signs telling people of colour you are not welcome here. So why do they need to encourage people to go to the countryside who just happen to have a darker skin colour than you or me?
Well, it's getting really silly, isn't it, Julia? And this is on a cycle now. We have these stories, we have these reports every few months. And actually, what's sad is that underneath this there is an issue. It's not a massive one, I don't think, but there is an issue in that if you run a business in the countryside, we want everyone to come to the countryside. We want it to be open, and if you fancy it, come on and crack on. What I do think is there is a certain amount of prejudice, but the prejudice isn't about people from ethnic minorities. The prejudice is from academics who love writing papers saying that people who live in the countryside are all backward and bigoted, and therefore they're horrible to anyone else who comes out there.
But also,
and it's all based on anecdote and nonsense. But that's the real problem.
No, but also because these horribly white villages. But the reality is, it's like it's like BBC executives who think something like 45% of London, the capital city where I am right now, is now an ethnic minority, and so they think that's what the whole country A looks like and B should look like, whereas actually that is simply not an accurate representation. But I mean, look, there are plenty of things that one could do. There are sports that attract more people of particular, not just skin colours, but particularly cultural background. We don't sit and go, well, there aren't enough white people playing in cricket in India. I mean, actually, most of the England cricket team are out there now, but it's really there aren't enough white men playing basketball at the highest level. It is absolutely fascinating that there should be this obsession about certain. Are there enough white people playing in reggae bands? I don't know, but it's just an obsession with colour. There is nothing that is stopping anyone anyone of any background from going to the countryside, other than the fact that might not be something that they want to go and do on holiday. Maybe they prefer to go to a beach, whether they are white or black or brown or Muslim or Christian or atheist. They might prefer to go skiing. They might prefer to be sitting on a city break. But why? I just don't even begin to understand why anyone is even thinking about this.
And look, the countryside is very white, but largely we know that's because the pattern of immigration has been that most people from ethnic minorities have gone to cities and towns. Therefore, they're not in the countryside. There are actually, there was a big wave of immigration from Eastern Europe into the countryside, people working on farms. Yeah. You know, if you go to somewhere like Spalding in Lincolnshire, where there's a huge Polish population, and they've been welcomed with open arms, and everyone else will be welcomed as well. But as I say, the reason, if you're worried about this, and I know you're struggling to get your head around it being a problem in the first place, but if you're struggling with this, why people from ethnic minorities aren't coming to the countryside, the fact that academics from Leicester University are telling them that everyone in the countryside is racist and they're going to chase them out with pitchforks is probably part of the reason people don't come.
Exactly. I wonder how many academics at Leicester University of different pigmentations. But again, most normal people don't get it. It seems to me only people who are talking about this are people who are racist because they're obsessed with. They're looking around going, oh, they've got a black face, they haven't. I can't imagine that being something I would even register or notice. Were I in London or were I, in the Cotswolds? It's utterly bizarre. We've got to talk about Peter Mandelson first of all, because he's a former Labour MP. He's still a peer, although apparently not going to the House of Lords. Should he still be allowed to be a Lord? And also should the Prime Minister, as advised by Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader now, should there be a full investigation into his links with Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, I think the worst thing that's come out is the fact that when he was a minister in government, he was clearly lobbying or potentially lobbying on behalf of Epstein, and in tax affairs that I'm not even quite sure understand what he actually was lobbying or would have been lobbying about. But this is really going now to a situation where clearly either we've got no decent security forces who understand things and find out, or Keir Starmer knew all of this and should never have appointed him. I mean, it's pretty obvious now that there was a whole record of things, and it's just unbelievable that someone at the top end of government wasn't able to tell Keir Starmer.
It's untenable that he didn't know. There were serious. I mean, these questions have been over him already. I mean, he, as I've said, he tells 4 lies before breakfast every day. He's already lost 2 jobs simply because of telling lies and misdeeds. I mean, so there's a big question mark now about whether or not, as one of our callers pointed out, he should face charges of misconduct in public office over the clearly sort of if these Epstein files are true, they're not made up. It appears accepting money from somebody who he was actually lobbying on behalf of things like banking bonuses, not declaring that income. He's got form for that over Geoffrey Robertson and that loan for his Notting Hill mansion. I mean, I genuinely don't think he ever knowingly tells the truth.
No, I mean, there was enough known publicly about what he'd done before he was appointed, taking away all of the stuff that we're covering. So really, it's very, very strange that Keir Starmer was prepared to do that, particularly going to the United States, which is such an important...
Yes. Why do you think he did? I mean, because he's done a lot of putting the old band back together. There's a lot of people like the Jonathan Powells and people who worked in the Blair government. There's obviously a sort of, look, we haven't got any talent on our benches, we'll have to bring back the old crowd. There's this, Peter Mandelson appears to have some sort of hold over people. Certainly, he was working closely with Morgan McSweeney, the current Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who appears to have just made a string of terrible decisions.
Yes, I mean, he seems to have, I think it's because, remember, he only came into politics quite late on, really. He hasn't been there for a long, long time. And it looks like he almost felt he had to go back to those people who were involved in the Tony Blair government. And more and more, you just feel that he's not been his own person. Somebody somewhere is behind him, and in terms of the whole, it just doesn't look that we've got a Prime Minister actually who's really, really in charge.
No, certainly. I mean, that's the thing. You know, I've said for a long time, he's an empty suit, doesn't appear to believe in anything. That's why we get all these U-turns. Talk of another U-turn. I don't know what we're up to now, 13, 14, 48, who knows. But even Labour MPs are now calling for him to scrap plans to put asylum seekers, not into camps, not into houses of multiple occupancy, but into council homes. So literally we're going to build council homes and then put illegal arrivals into them rather than local families who are desperate for decent, affordable accommodation. I mean, why anyone thought this was a good idea is beyond me anyway. But as soon as we know Labour backbenchers start getting uppity about something, he's going to be forced to.
I'm not surprised, because a lot of the casework that most MPs have, and particularly in areas where Labour might be representing, is about housing, is about shortage of housing, is about families who've been waiting for a very long time in very overcrowded situations. And now, if they actually see that when a new council house is being built, that they're not even going to have a chance of being given that or allocated that, and that it's going to someone who's only been in the country a very short time. I mean,
there's no right to be here.
No, exactly. I've always thought that you've got to, you work your way up. I started off living in a little tiny bedsit, and people work their way up, and to allocate somebody who's not legally here even is just, I think it's so outrageous that will have to be a U-turn. But then the military camps are a problem too, because they're so many people, and my solution on that is that if they're still illegally in the country because they haven't yet been allocated any kind of status, then they should be locked in. I mean, those gates should be locked.
No, I don't think the human rights lawyers would like that, Kate. I don't think that's allowed. But that's the madness of it, isn't it? It's very interesting. You mentioned the camps. I mean, there's been every single Sunday there's a protest at Crowborough in East Sussex where some of those asylum seekers were moved in, the illegal migrants, under cover of darkness in vans. But apparently, minister documents show they feared riots at that army base and other army bases if they move in large numbers of migrants. Again, what a low opinion they have of the British people. But here's the thing, maybe you should wonder why people are genuinely worried.
Yes, it's kind of blaming the public for a decision that's been taken by government without any consultation with those local people. And I just find, British people do not riot. Country people particularly do not riot normally. I mean, riot is a very, emotive word. I think what we will see is very, very many protests, particularly from women who feel that their children are going to be not very safe wandering around with men who have, come from a different culture, who have a different attitude to women. It's very clearly, bound to lead to issues that are problems. And government again has to accept that the real issue here is, why are these people being allowed, once they come in, not to be actually put straight on a plane and sent back, particularly those where we know where they've come from?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the question everyone really wants to know the answer to, isn't it? I mean, we must talk about some of these candidates that are, the council elections and the like. We've got a candidate, a Labour candidate, who says that Muslims shouldn't be friends with Jews. We've got a Labour MP, by the way, who is sitting in a council flat in Tower Hamlets. We've got the Gorton Denton by-election, which is basically going to be a sort of a culture wars battle, with the Greens being blatantly going for the Muslim vote. There shouldn't be any such thing as a Muslim vote, a white vote, black. Shouldn't be anything like that in a country where we have the community cohesion we're told we must crave, and Reform are going for a very different vote. I mean, things are going horribly wrong when our country is being divided along those lines, aren't they?
Well, we are seeing a much greater division now in constituencies where there's very high proportion of Muslim people living, who seem to not want, many of them, to integrate in any way whatsoever, and they're being led by mullahs and by leaders who are not interested in them becoming what I would call true British citizens. They just want them to be separated out, to still keep to all their cultural way of behaving, and it's not acceptable. And I feel very sorry for the people of that constituency, because they are going to be absolutely flooded with leaflets and people knocking on their doors. And I think a lot of them will just say, not quite cursing it, but saying, go away, we're not going to vote for anybody. You know, I think there is worry about that, and that's bad for democracy.
Could be very understandable. Just finally, the Labour woes, Keir Starmer, total humiliation, kowtowing off in China, absolutely got nothing in return worth having. He's back, but of course he's still got the ongoing issues of leadership rivals around him. Lots of talk in the papers the weekend. Angela Rayner, his former Deputy Prime Minister, who claims to be big mates with still since she had to resign, that she's got a £1 million war chest to fight to be, well, not to put in her oar in with either Andy Burnham or Wes Streeting or anyone else, but to go for it herself. How do you rate her chances of a Labour leadership challenge and a win?
Well, I think Angela Rayner would certainly be the candidate of the left and even the central left, if you can define it like that. She's clearly making it very clear that she wants to be the leader. But I think, you know, whatever happens, Keir Starmer has to go in the interest of the country, not just in the interest of the Labour Party. I mean, it really is getting to be ridiculous.
Yeah, but if it's going to be Ed Miliband, I'm thinking we stick with Starmer.
We don't want an Ed Miliband zealot, no. But we do want someone who actually is showing that they care about our country more than they care about countries. I mean, the China thing was just outrageous.
I can't see a greater embarrassment for us on the world stage, short of him falling down the plane steps and, you know, and his trousers splitting. I mean, it was that bad. So another vote yesterday by the BMA, the resident doctors, we used to call them junior doctors, and they basically agreed that they're basically got the right to strike again over the next 6 months if talks with the government doesn't go well. I heard one representative of the BMA committee today saying, look, you know, they don't plan to strike. They just want to have it, you know, as a negotiating tool. How likely do you think it is that there will actually be a strike?
Well, I am quietly optimistic, I must say. There have been talks going on between the DH and the BMA quietly for some time. I mean, they're not easy because it all turns really on the money, and the government is still taking the position there isn't any. But they're still talking, and that's important. You can't have a deal if you're not talking, so they're still talking. I understand why the doctors want this sort of threat of strike in the bag. It's to keep streeting feet to the fire.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of things really worth pointing out here. First of all, the responses to the call for strike action of the BMA are starting to taper off. Not as many doctors voted this time, although the majority who did voted for strike action. So there's a bit of a sort of curve in the graph going down. I think that's quite important. Secondly, there's a change in the law that comes around just after Valentine's Day on the 15th of February this year. There's new employment law. So had the doctors balloted for strike action after the 15th of February, they could have got a mandate for a whole year.
Oh, right.
It was changed. So, I mean, they're cute enough to know that. So, you know, they've gone for the 6 months thing. They can always renew it. You could end up with 18 months of strike action. But
start all over
I'm
again.
quietly optimistic. I can put no evidence on the table, but
they're trying to make this happen. I mean, the support among the doctors has gone down, and we've seen this again and again with the last two sets of strikes. Even though we're, you know, looking at 5 days, starting at 7 a.m. one day, and in crucial times, even just before the Christmas period, it actually didn't impact that much in the big scheme of things, not like it used to do, you know, a year or two ago. You know, people carrying on working, but there's also a lot of fallback in public support for the doctors over this, isn't there? A lot of people are struggling. A lot of people doing bad. They're going, you know what? As public sector workers, you've done better than most in the you know, the round of in 2024 when Labour got in. You got your big pay rise with 26%, or was it 29? I lose track over a couple of years, and it wasn't over 1 year. But you know what? We're all in a boat that's we're sinking right now. You're not a special case, and we're no longer supporting you.
Yeah, I agree. And there's two things to say about that. Firstly, I don't think the doctors care about public opinion. They care about, can they get the votes?
I think the BMA are very different. The representatives, there's a lot of talk, but they're very hard left. They're very
they were taken over. They were taken over by a group called Doctors' Votes, and they did a kind of, as Momentum took over the Labour Party, Doctors' Votes took over the BMA, and they manage they chair all of the main committees except the Finance Committee. So yes, you are right. We're dealing with a very different organisation. As far as the NHS is concerned, well, on the face of it, yes, they're getting good. I never thought I'd hear myself say this. They're getting good at managing strikes. Okay, and good luck to that. The numbers are slightly misleading, although they're cracking a hell of a lot of people through the system while the strikes are on. They're actually the numbers that we get, the 7.5 million people on the waiting list, comprises of people who are waiting for a diagnostic or are waiting for a day case procedure. And you can get the day case, the simple day cases through, and you can get the diagnostics through because they don't need the doctors to do the scans and imaging and all that.
So it can carry on.
The numbers look good, but if you're older and you've got multi-morbidity, as we call it, more than one thing wrong with you and something tricky, you'll be parked.
That's interesting. I've certainly had elderly relatives who've certainly had appointments cancelled. Again, moved by 6 months, which is not even just like moved to the next week. It's really interesting actually. In the in this week we've seen this this revelation. I think it was the Conservatives who put it out that basically hospital trusts are being paid $3 million a month or something to basically send out letters to their people on the waiting list to say, hello, do you still need to have your treatment? Are you still waiting for it? Or are you dead? And if you don't reply by a certain time, we'll take you off the list. Now, a lot of people aren't very good at answering their post, or they've moved house or the like. A lot of people wait a very long time. One of the main reasons people don't turn up for appointments is actually the appointment was so far ahead. They don't keep. A lot of us. I'm someone I've got stuff in the diary in a year's time. Most people don't live like that. But is this just a cunning little wheeze to cut those waiting lists to make them good, or is this a sensible admin project?
It's sensible. I mean, we always used to validate waiting lists, as we call it, but not as often as they're being done now. We might do it every 6 months because you'd allow the system really to validate itself. If people turn up or respond to a letter, park. But now, of course, and doing it, as you said, a lot of people are not very good at letters and all the rest of it. So validating waiting lists with the accuracy it's being done now is a very, very work-consuming, people-consuming job. It's phone calls. It's actually talking to people. That's why the government put more money in, because they're hiring agency workers to do this job and to figure out whether or not people do want treatment. So it's partly a bit of a wheeze, really, to bring the numbers down. And if you look at the last set of numbers that they published, it was all mainly through validation. It wasn't.
It wasn't actually getting more done. Well, I mean, what is this issue in terms of getting operating theatres to work? And we've got the same thing with courts. We've got a backlog of people going to court, but about a third of all courts aren't open every day. Actually, putting people through the criminal justice system. And the same in theatres. We've got huge number of NHS surgeons not operating most of the time. Lots of citizens. What's going on? Is this failure of management? Is this just a failure of bureaucracy? Because certainly in my experience, a lot of the issues when it comes to these things is a failure of bureaucrocy. Someone's paperwork doesn't turn up. Someone turns up to the wrong place, etc.
I don't think it's bureaucracy. I mean, getting the waiting list getting the operating list on each day full is, that's the priority. Everybody's focusing on that. Where it tips out are where you've got hospitals that don't have a difference between what's called a hot and a cold site. A hot site is where they operate on people who have emergencies, and a cold site is waiting list stuff. Some of the older hospitals just don't have the facilities to divide up the hot and cold facility. So you come in, an orthopedic surgeon may come in one morning, 8 o'clock, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to do a 6-people list, hips and what have you. And then suddenly there's an accident on the end, whatever it is nearby, and you go full of people who need emergency surgery. It doesn't have to be orthopedics, it's just operating theatres. So there's that. I mean, there's stuff, this time of year, people go sick, they call in sick late and you can't get another scrub nurse in, or another operating theatre nurse, which is a skill in itself. So, I mean, there's a whole complexity of this. I mean, where I have seen stuff that, I mean, on the brighter side, they're now, where you can do it, you can get 2 operating theatres running side by side, and you get 1 consultant operating in the 2 operating theatres with the registrars doing the stitching up and the bits and pieces.
You're using their skills. We also know things like waiting lists. There's cunning ways of moving them. An elderly relative of mine who needs a hip operation was told on the NHS it's a 9-month wait to get the gap. You have to have physio. You have to have physio for 6 weeks, even though that patient was told you definitely don't need physio by their doctor. That won't work. But then you'd have to wait the 9 months for the physio And then after that, you can then go on the waiting list. It's just a 9-month delay to the waiting list. That's all that is.
Hospital managers are very clever at doing this kind of thing when there's political pressure on them.
Absolutely. Let's start this side of the Atlantic right now, and let's talk about what's going on in Scotland. And For Women Scotland, those wonderful campaigning women who won that statement of the bleeding obvious insanity in reality at the Supreme Court last April, that basically when you're deciding whether a man is a man or a woman is a woman, it all comes down to biological sex, and that's kind of it, rather than what you think you are. They're in court once again, this time against the Scottish Government.
That's right. So on that day when For Women Scotland got that judgment in the Supreme Court about the Equality Act, that sex means sex, not paperwork, a lawyer who was sitting there with me, I was there in the court, turned around to me and she said to me, there's nothing left for us to do.
Oh, bless.
And here we are. The government has not put that into practice. It's sitting on the guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and now For Women Scotland is having to take its own government, the Scottish Government, to court again after it lost in the Supreme Court, and this time it's about prisons. The Scottish Government, unlike the government elsewhere in the UK, puts men who identify as women into women's prisons unless it can be proved that those men are a serious risk to women, and its standard for that is that those men, for example, raped, tortured and murdered women. So it's willing to move men who raped and murdered and tortured men into women's prisons. Yeah, because that's fine. Like, they aren't going to go with the women that they're in with. And there are indeed murderers and torturers, male murderers and torturers in the women's estate right now, and have been for years in Scotland. And the Scottish Government says that it's those men's human rights. So their human rights matter, and their human rights are so important, and it's so convinced that the European Court of Human Rights is on its side on this, that that it's actually compulsory for the government to dragoon women into being like supporting actresses in these men's fantasies of being women, and that is what human rights means. So For Women Scotland is standing up there again. It's got the same barrister, Aidan O'Neill, KC, making the same arguments that sex is real.
But I mean, this is the thing. We all remember the Isla Bryson case, a double rapist convicted of raping 2 different women, who then put on a wig, and you know, he had his meat and 2 veg clearly on show through his leggings. He wasn't even trying to convince anyone. He was taking the mick, and he's decided during his the criminal justice process. Oh, it turns out he thought he was Isla Bryson, obviously not his real name, that he was a woman, a trans woman, and we had that absurd situation of Nicola Sturgeon, then First Minister of Scotland, defending the rights of a double rapist who put in a prison cell with women, arguing that, is Isla Bryson a man or a woman? Isla Bryson is a rapist. Well, is Isla Bryson a man or a woman rapist? I mean, certainly in English law, I think in Scottish law, technicality, you can't be a rapist unless you are a man. What with needing that particular appendage that we don't have? But this is actually why is this a hill they want to die on? Why, as you say, we all thought the Supreme Court ruling, that'll be it. We've got Bridget Phillipson, the Equalities Minister in the Westminster government, refusing, basically sitting for months now. I think, was it last September? The Equality and Human Rights Commission sent their guidance on. I don't know why we needed guidance after that Supreme Court ruling, but apparently we did. They've sent that to that she wants to make sure everything's inclusive. Well, you can either have a women-only space or not a women-only space. It's not complicated. She's sitting on that. Again, it seems to be a hill to die for an awful lot, whether it's Labour or SNP. Why? Why are they so adamant about the rights of not just men who identify and think that they're women, but male criminals, often sex criminals, who claim to be women?
I mean, it's puzzling, isn't it? You have to wonder what's being said behind the scenes, because, of course, there are people on the fringes of the Labour Party or SNP, and also in Scotland, the Greens offer support, and they really are all in on gender self-ID. Yeah. So that might be part of it. I also think that women in prison, most people just don't care about prisoners at all. Yeah. They think that maybe we can do a risk assessment, but we know that very few rapes are even reported to the police. So why do we think that a man who has raped and tortured and murdered men might not turn his attentions to women?
But also we know that the vast majority of women who are in prison actually have been victims of abuse by parent figures or by partners.
Absolutely.
And that's incredibly common. And therefore they're already victims.
And then the other thing I'd say is that I think there has been a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, the Supreme Court judges said this, and the HRC has acknowledged it. There's been a lot of misunderstanding of the law. And for 15 years, the great and the good were telling us that if you had that magic piece of paper, it really did change your sex for the purposes of law.
Magically.
The Supreme Court said it didn't. But those people still kind of believe that, and believe that they can't just say men are men and women are women. We have to protect, vulnerable men in the men's estate. That they will face human rights claims, and I think they might too. But they'd win them. Yeah,
well, exactly. But also there are still, I believe, 4 men in women's prisons in England as well.
Yes, so they're held in a separate wing, Downview Wing E, which I still don't think is a good solution.
They can still be held in a separate wing in a men's prison.
Exactly, but the thing is, the reason for that, and you will not believe this, the reason is so they can socialise with women and learn to be women more convincingly. That's the actual stated reason in the policy. Well, they can go off and do their cosplaying on their own, thanks, not be bothering the women with it.
Sorry, I almost said some really bad words on air, though. So I had to really stop it defies me. This is, when we have this conversation, this is the whole sort of like, is everyone else listening to this? This is Alice in Wonderland madness. And again, I think, I was perhaps less confident than you were on the Supreme Court Judgment Day that this was going to be over. And the likes, some people like Piers Morgan writing books like Woke is Dead. Yeah, woke it is so...
Well, you were right.
It's embedded in our schools, in academia, in our politics, in our civil service, in the NHS. I mean, it's all over the place. Let's talk about where it is in the NHS state, because really interesting case. A landmark decision at a New York court this in the last week has seen a young woman by the name of Fox Varian. She had her breast cut off by doctors while a teenager so that she could, quote, live as a boy. She has won $2 million in compensation for her suffering. It's expected to spark thousands more lawsuits in the US and in Britain. And basically, she's now 22. She, was very confused, thought she was a boy. She claimed in court, and her parents, as usual, parents were told, as they always are, your kid's going to commit suicide if you don't agree to the transgender drugs, and then carrying on and having her breasts cut off, which is something very much encouraged by the pro-trans movement within our NHS right now. Young men having their penises and their testicles removed. It's just extraordinary. But we've seen this happening to 18 and 19-year-olds here as well. And basically, she says, look, she expressed doubts, but they said, no, and pushed her into it. She's won her case. I'm surprised it's only 2 million. I'm surprised it's not 2 billion, frankly, for what they've done to her. Do you think that we are going to see more cases? And will this finally try and stop doctors from pushing this horrific butchery on our young people?
Well, I'm never again after the Supreme Court judgment saying there's nothing left for us to do. So I do think it's an incredibly positive step, obviously in America first. So most of these cases actually fall down on procedural grounds, or they're out of time or that sort of thing. And they tend to get settled anyway out of court. So for this to go to court and to get what is a sizable judgment, the thing I think it's going to do first in America is make insurers look at it. I mean, if I were a medical malpractice insurance firm, I would not insure gender medicine anymore. It's too clearly the mood is changing. Too big a risk.
And that means you then won't do it. Doctors won't do it.
Exactly. And then you see the hospital decide that this is not a line that they will do. So that's the way I think it'll play out in America. Now here, of course, these things are being done almost entirely by the NHS, and the NHS self-insures. And it has an organisation called NHS Resolutions that deals with all the medical malpractice claims, of which there are lots. And I'm not saying all of them are justified, but there just are a lot. And nearly everything gets settled and we never find out about it.
Yeah,
so that's the worry. There are already cases being settled.
I'd be very surprised if there aren't. And again, isn't it fascinating though? It's always money that talks in the end. They're making, doctors get their all the acclaim because they're the top doctor in this field. They're getting paid to do these operations, and in America as well in the private healthcare. But then if the insurance is pulled and then they can't do it, or they're getting sued, then it stops. Rather than maybe we shouldn't be cutting completely healthy breasts or completely healthy genitals of completely healthy children who are really confused and suffering from often, ADHD, autism, or often, frankly, just gay and a bit confused and have got parents who haven't supported that. It is the biggest scandal of our time. It really, really is, and it's extraordinary it's still going on. But little glimmers of hope give us hope that one day this will suddenly just you know, like the Salem witch trials, one day it just stops. So we've talked an awful lot about Peter Mandelson today, rather less so about Andrew. But girls, a lot of these Epstein files do actually focus on Andrew, and of course Sarah Ferguson's just extensive contact with Jeffrey Epstein after he was convicted of soliciting a 14-year-old girl for prostitution, while he was in prison, after he'd been released from prison, contact since then, and the expectation of frankly of exchange of, shall we say, help to each other. What do you make of where Prince Andrew, ex-Prince Andrew and Fergie are right now? She's leaving all the charities, they're being closed down. He's out of his lodge, he's lost his title, he's lost his HRH. How does this leave them for the future?
Well, this is such an amazing story, isn't it? Because we all thought essentially he had now gone off into the wilderness, sent into exile on Marsh Farm, this dilapidated cottage on the Sandringham estate, to live out his days in obscurity. He must have thought the worst was over, and he's now back in the centre of the storm. Although I suppose he might be slightly grateful that there's some attention now being focused on Peter Mandelson for a change, rather than just on him. But of course, once again, this explodes all of his notions that he said to Emily Maitlis about being an honourable gentleman and trying to break things off with Epstein. We can see quite clearly he was lying through his teeth. He has maintained that relationship. And also now, of course, as wasn't the case before, his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, absolutely in the mire as well, with these fawning emails saying she wants to marry Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. Marry me. I mean, and this was after his conviction.
That's the crucial point. This was after the conviction, even bringing her girls into the equation with Jeffrey Epstein, sending terrible emails as well about going off on a holiday where you get up to naughty antics when you're a teenager. And of course, now, you know, this is just the latest blow for her to lose her charity, Sarah's Trust. It's a small charity set up 5 years ago, but they've now decided to close down. This is the 8th charity that she has now lost, or that has distanced itself from her. She also, of course, had her books pulped that were supposed to be coming out. I mean, so all of her income streams, all of her public profile positions have gone. Whether she'll remake herself in America, that remains to be seen. There was a suggestion she could have done that a couple of months ago. I think now, given everything else that we've seen, much more unlikely that she'll be given a sofa with Oprah.
Yeah. Why don't you do a tell-all interview, a tell-all book? I mean, I wouldn't put it past her. I mean, you know, but this is the thing. She's not actually accused of any wrongdoing. Prince Andrew, there are 2 women in Virginia Giuffre, got the £10 million payoff, even though he'd never met her, certainly hadn't had sex with her when she was 17, and trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to London to see Prince Andrew, as he then was. But another woman has said that she was trafficked to meet him, with this 26-year-old Russian woman, very beautiful, very clever, to have dinner with. There's some horrible, really creepy photos. That photo of him on all fours over a woman lying flat on the ground. I mean, it's redacted. We can't see her face, but I don't even know whether the woman is conscious or not. I mean, it was just genuinely very, very, very creepy. But he seems to be far more implicated in all of this. So Sarah Ferguson is just a matter of her being money-grubbing and having no judgment. I mean, I have to say, taking her 19 and 20-year-old daughters to go and visit Jeffrey Epstein for lunch in his home, with him, of course, paying for the plane journeys. Of course, she wouldn't pay for her own plane journeys. Basically, a couple of days after he'd been let out of prison for soliciting a 14-year-old girl for sex, blows my mind as a mum, sending him photos of his daughters. I'm lucky for her. I think her daughters were not of his physical type, judging by the pictures we've seen of the women who were being girls routinely raped by Jeffrey Epstein. So lucky them. But when it comes to Andrew, the former prince, the allegations are much more serious. There's a lot of talk about, you know, will he testify in Congress? Will he be forced to? Would he go? But even the king doesn't have that power. And it's clear the king has no truck with Andrew and hasn't for many years.
Yeah, there's nothing more that the king can actually do. He's done everything within his power to strip Andrew of all titles and honours. Only Parliament can strip him of his dukedom. He remains His Grace the Duke of York in law. He's not His Royal Highness the Duke of York. He is His Grace the Duke of York, although we don't call him that. Congress can't subpoena non-Americans to come over there. Yeah. Congress is limited. There is something called a Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty that the Department of Justice can ask British authorities to use to secure testimony, and that would require Andrew to appear before a UK judge probably Westminster Magistrates Court, something like that, under oath. But even there, you do have the right against self-incrimination. So even if he's compelled to appear there, he can exercise his right and refuse to answer specific questions. And he can't be and you can only extradite somebody once they have a criminal charge against them. So the only thing you can appeal to is to Andrew's decency.
Oh, well, good luck with that. We're all chuckling in the studio now. I don't think I'm thinking that. No, we had two very interesting guests on yesterday. We had Dickie Arbiter, who was former press secretary to the late Queen Elizabeth. We also had Di Davies, who's head of Royal Protection some of this time, with Diana, before a lot of this. But both of them were very clear that their view that, look, information about, where Andrew was and who he was with would absolutely, have been held by his Royal Protection officers. And for goodness sake, they were with him. They knew he was on this island or on the home of a man who, oh, look, Jeffrey Epstein, is that the same guy who's being convicted? Due diligence would have required them to know that this man had this conviction. And other information. They would have seen a lot of things. Again, everyone else who worked there or went to this guy's house saw nothing but 14 and 50-year-old girls, for goodness sake. And the man didn't have a daughter. They weren't their friends, And then they report it up the chain, and it would go to very senior levels, and that would be reported to senior figures in Buckingham Palace, including, the Queen's, private secretary. That information would have got that far. The question is, would it have gone as far as the then Queen at the time? What do you think?
I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was decided that wouldn't be information that would be worth the Queen knowing to distress her personally.
Because she was elderly, he was her favourite son.
Exactly. Yeah, but best off that she doesn't know. What you don't know can't hurt you.
But she must have known something when she helped, by all accounts, this 10 million or whatever the figure was, but around then, to Virginia Giuffre for a woman Prince Andrew had never met. He didn't have that money. She apparently helped fund that. What did she think that money was for?
Well, in terms of not informing her, that would give Her Majesty plausible deniability as well about all of this. But yes, obviously, the key issue there was that there was no admission of guilt. This was just to make a story go away. Whether the Queen was advised on all the details of this or whether she was just advised, lawyers say it's not worth us dragging this through the courts or having a huge story. It's worth paying the money to push the story away. She could easily have been remained in the dark about all of the details, even under that situation and scenario. Her Majesty wasn't across all details of these sorts of things at all. But what it does draw, yes, these police protection officers were with Andrew during these visits. Things were known. But same thing with Mandelson, right?
Yep.
What happened to our vetting systems in this country? The due diligence, basic trawling of the internet and so forth would have revealed a lot more than apparently our intelligence services were able to.
I mean, in people's defence, you talk about Epstein, the 2004 conviction. I mean, that wasn't in the British papers. He wasn't that well known here. Certainly was in American papers. But again, people like Mandelson and Andrew knew of this because he said it basically was he was fitted up and it wasn't true. And so they were aware of these allegations. And of course, that was pleaded down to the two charges involving one girl, whereas in fact there were, I think, 28 at the time who were complaining of having been trafficked in the same way. The question we're asking our audience, just finally, do you trust there'll be a proper investigation, or do you fear an establishment cover-up? What's your answer to that, Rafe?
I would hope that given the amount of cover-ups that have been exposed as being cover-ups and lies and duplicity, that we will now finally get the truth, because as we all know, the cover-up is often worse than the scandal itself. Nothing is worse than this scandal, but the cover-up so far and the selective, you often think that Mandelson has a split personality. He can't actually remember anything that his past
terrible memory
ever did. I think it's, public trust has been so eroded. Mandelson's there for misconduct in public office. The criminal threshold for that is whether you have destroyed public trust in the institution of your office. I think for everybody involved, we do need clear transparency with this investigation.
I wish I shared your confidence in that. That must have been a bit awkward for you. Former Conservative Government Advisor, Adam Bolton. Again, I've known Adam Bolton for years. I actually consider him a friend, I have to say. Known for many, many, many years. Absolutely superb political editor at Sky News for many, many years, and still a broadcaster. But I was genuinely shocked when I saw him on telly yesterday, being really defending in lots of ways Mandelson and certainly his appointment. And he would not. It was really interesting, Claire, yesterday, just now. He would not He would not say that it was a misjudgment by the Prime Minister to have appointed him. It was a risk worth taking. We were discussing on this. Back me up, folks. Back me up online and on air, saying that it was not a risk worth taking. This guy is unfit for public office. He shouldn't be appointed.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's really interesting that he's got such a strong level of feeling towards somebody that has essentially let him down enormously as a friend, let alone as a political colleague.
And he says that he doesn't believe in cancelling people, and I'm with him on that. And I don't, I've never been of the view that I should, not be friends with someone we don't share political views or people. Things go wrong. I've got to be honest with you. I mean, I have worked with 2 people who have been convicted of paedophilia. Yeah, not weirdly. Never been in contact with them since that day. Sure. I've never found that difficult. And the only friendship I've broken off over political views is actually a long-standing friend of my old colleague Yvonne Ridley, and she's been on the show quite a few times. And I messaged her to say, genuinely, her views. I mean, I think the stuff that she spouts on social media it's not a difference of opinion on Gaza. You can have a different opinion on issues like that and Israel. I think, as I've said, I think what you post is anti-Semitic, and I simply I wouldn't be friends with someone who was posting any racist if you genuinely feel that way. I just don't think you're a good person. I just don't want to be friends with you. I think there are times when you do cancel a friendship if they do something awful or have horrible views or say horrible. I'm sorry, I think you do. I admire, again, find someone who loves you as much as he does, but he seems to think that it was right to go, that he may well face criminal investigation, but that somehow no one knew any of this when he was appointed in 24.
And I find that bit probably the most difficult, because Peter Mandelson had history. This was not the first time he'd been caught out in untruths. We all know that. It's been happening a long time. And for Gordon Brown, I really don't like the fact everybody's now sainting Gordon Brown for getting the police involved in September of last year, when he was the one who appointed him, even though he hated him. And the feeling was mutual.
I feel that what's going on right now in the Labour Party is actually this was going on in the lobby when I was a junior journalist on the Evening Standard, right, in politics, and it was called the TBGBs, and this was Tony Blair, Gordon Brown. This is when Gordon Brown would a budget, and literally the day before, Tony Blair and his people would be going, "What's in the budget?" And Gordon would be like, no. And this guy, Charlie Whelan, remember Charlie Whelan? And Charlie Whelan worked for Gordon Brown, and he would be briefing journalists on one side of the office, and on the other side, you'd get the Alistair Campbells and then you'd Peter Mandelson briefing, the Tony Blair side of things. And there was this ongoing battle. There is no love lost between these people, and there's no doubt at all that Gordon Brown brought Peter Mandelson back because I need somebody who can operate, who can help me stay this sinking ship. But then we understand from these emails with Epstein that basically Mandelson was trying to boot Gordon Brown out. As it wasn't until after he'd already lost the election, and then they were doing these negotiations with the Lib Dems, and basically everyone made it clear no one is willing to work with Gordon Brown. He's going to have to go. Bye smelly, one of the emails. But I mean, I feel like we are in the middle of a very, very vicious, long-standing family war.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
This is the Labour Party at war with itself.
And I think it'll do for the PM. I really, really do, because you only have to look back over history. Profumo brought down a government, and this is worse.
Why?
The Minister of War at the time lied to Parliament, and that's what did for him. He had the affair with Christine Keir, yada, yada, yada.
Probably giving her secrets which were going to the Russians.
And that's the point. But he lied about it, and that's what saw him off. I think this one is worse. This is connections with a known paedophile. This is monetary transactions. This is potentially leaking sensitive market information across...
Well, and also it's how much was known by... How much should have been...
Exactly.
How was known or should have reasonably been known if proper vetting had taken place by the government, or was there just such desperation from Morgan McSweeney to get his mate... his mentor into government, so into that role. And again, Peter Mandelson keeps saying he had no financial benefit, well, apart from the 75 grand and the 10 grand to his now husband, but also then getting a job, a multi-million-pound job afterwards. But again, every single job on that basis, you're getting helped, aren't you?
Yeah, of course you are. So it's all of the indirect help and assistance that made him into a financially well-off individual.
Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your reaction to Adam Bolton on that. I'm January. I wanted to get him on because I am flabbergasted by people sort of saying, we just didn't know then. You go back, you look at how many people, politicians, journalists, people who'd worked with Peter Mandelson were saying, you shouldn't appoint this guy. It's going to blow up in your face. It's blown up in the Prime Minister's face and the country's face. Because I'm sorry, he was representing Britain. That is a diplomatic role. You know what? You need to be whiter than white in that role. And he was blacker than black. But now let's turn our attention back to the other man who's been on the front page of the papers, the other Prince of Darkness, as he's known. He was a prince. Now, of course, he's Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Let's talk about it with Daily Mail's Robert Hardman. He's a journalist and author of Charles III, a biography of the King. Very good afternoon to you, Robert.
Afternoon, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Well, look, I mean, we've lots of focus on Mandelson at the moment, criminal investigations there, but we also know there's some very serious investigations into not just Andrew, like what he knew when, but also some big question marks about whether or not more women were supposedly trafficked to him by Jeffrey Epstein, his close friend. But also, of course, the news that we discovered last night that he'd been basically thrown out of his house, the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate, and sent off, banished to Sandringham in Norfolk. Would that be on the orders of the King?
Yes, I mean, the King has, I think, done all that he pretty much can to move Andrew as far away from the royal estate, the royal family, all things royal. I mean, he can't actually, we're not in medieval times, he can't send him to the Tower or into exile, but I mean, he's certainly been exiled from the royal orbit to the outer reaches of the Sandringham estate. And I think the royal family would hope that that's the last we see of him for a very long time.
They might hope that, given that Andrew quite clearly it's very obvious, thinks he's done absolutely nothing wrong and he's been treated terribly unfairly, has a sense of entitlement that is extraordinary. I'm not entirely sure he is going to go away very quietly. The one thing a lot of people have been saying, a lot of the callers to the show as well, is that actually, the King acted, ruthlessly but absolutely right. Basically, very clearly, stripping him of his titles, HRH and all of that, and acting much more quickly and voluntarily than the Prime Minister has done, say, with Peter Mandelson, who's giving him his full confidence, much longer at that time. However, there are some questions being raised about who knew what when about Prince Andrew as he then was in his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, how far, his royal security, how far that went up in the police, whether the Queen, the late Queen's only principal private secretary would have been told, as senior figures have suggested that he would have been, that, Andrew was hanging around with a very, very bad person, staying at his house, cavorting with him, and that this should be stopped. Do you think that the late Queen had any idea, or her senior staff had any idea what was going on, and should they have acted?
Well, I mean, if they'd known what we know now, of course they should have acted, but I don't think they did. I mean, I think Andrew in particular was very headstrong, and he rather regarded his life as his own. He would do what he wanted. From time to time, palace officials would try and rein him in, and his usual tactic was to go around to see the Queen on a Sunday afternoon for tea, when there were no officials around, and whatever the latest prevailing restrictions on him that he didn't like, he'd sort of say, oh, it's all terribly unfair and they don't understand, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind if I did X or Y, and wear her down, and eventually she'd go, oh, all right then. I mean, that was a sort of pattern of behaviour. I mean, I think, going back to your point, I mean, you say, the king was, at the time, he stripped him of all these titles and everything. I mean, a lot of people were genuinely surprised by the severity of that. But as it turns out, the king did take the right decision, because the talk today, the talk for the last few days, hasn't really been, what do we do about Andrew? Because there's really not much left apart from telling him to go and testify. The talk's been on the government's response.
Yeah, it has, and yet again, people comes back. Who knew what when? It is impossible that his own security didn't know, that the senior police didn't know, and that it is impossible. We've been told by Di Davies and Dickie Arbiter, people who've been at the heart of the royal family many years, that this was not passed on to the senior figures in the palace. If they were not imparting that information to the late Queen and saying, you need to do something about this, this is going to explode in our faces, this is about the firm, then, for instance, I don't know, why did she act sooner? Why did she apparently contribute towards the £10 million paid to Virginia Giuffre, a woman who Prince Andrew to this day still claims he's never met, certainly didn't have sex with when she was trafficked, she claims, by Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, she's now dead and unable to tell more of her story. But it doesn't all add up, and there are still questions that need to be answered, surely.
Yeah, I mean, there are, but, we're going back 15, 20 years on some of this stuff. What records still remain? I mean, at the time of when Sir Andrew's descent began back in 2019 with his disastrous Newsnight interview, there were lots of questions being asked then about who knew what when, and what did the police know, and why aren't the police records showing? Was he in a Pizza Express when he said he was in Woking back in 25 years ago, whatever. There are all these questions. There are still, X million redacted files in the USA. I mean, all the Epstein saga has shown us is that this just never ends. I mean, that Andrew's, I suppose you could chart the beginning of his descent way back in 2010, when the Mail on Sunday had that photograph of him, walking in the park with Epstein after he'd come out of prison.
I would say before then, because he's never met a dodgy billionaire he doesn't like. Let's be honest. I mean, there's some other forms. There's some big question marks about his behaviour when he was UK trade envoy. I mean, look, you and I will remember we're old hands. All those Randy Andy headlines. He wasn't the heir. He was the spare. That was what to be expected. But of course, he married Sarah Ferguson. Again, there was even more exploits during and after their marriage. And of course, Sarah Ferguson still, front page news for what she is alleged to have done in these Epstein files. She's now lost, I think, all of her charities or anything that she's been attached to. No one wants anything to do with her. Books being pulped and the like. Do you think that Andrew and Fergie, they're still very close despite being do you think they will just go away, or do you think that there will be a tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey, there will be a book or something of the like?
I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. I particularly don't think the Duke will do that, because the ex-Duke, Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, he still depends on his brother for what asks for the life he leads. He still has to have his bills paid.
Yeah, keep him on the payroll to keep him quiet, basically.
There's an element of that. But I mean, I think essentially all this stuff boils down into two categories. There is the what did people know, and what did people do? And at the moment, up until now, with Mandelson, for example, it's, what did he know about what Epstein was up to? Now, all of a sudden, the focus is on what he did in terms of, passing on, allegedly passing on documents that he shouldn't have done. And I think the same will apply to the Duke and Duchess as was to Andrew and Fergie. What do they know, and what do they do?
And probes about women being trafficked. I mean, again, this saga, as you say, is continuing. Let's talk about, we do this every day, the latest mad trans stuff. Every now and then it's a I don't know, an encouraging story that makes you think there's actually some hope for some sanity in the world. And every now and then it's rather more depressing stuff. We've got an ongoing court case in Scotland over whether or not men who claim that they think that they're women should be allowed to go into women's prisons. I mean, the answer is pretty simple. Logically, ethically, legally after the Supreme Court decision, but apparently governments still can't make up their minds. And we've had some pretty clear rulings, have we not, in terms of sports bodies? Many of the major sports bodies, football, others, the crucially International Olympic Committee, making it clear that no longer would trans-identified men be allowed to compete as if they were women against women in women's sport. They weren't going to be excluded from from sport. They were simply going to be excluded from the wrong sex category. They can compete as much as they want. They don't get to compete against the people they're not allowed to compete against. It's pretty straightforward for most of us. And yet, well, there's a bit of a spanner in the works from a latest study published in the British Medical Journal. Let's talk about it now with Tracy Edwards, MBE. She's from the Women's Sports Union. She's also a brilliant round-the-world yachtswoman. Very, very good morning to you, Tracy.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining me. I have to say, it did make me laugh when I was just checking, you know, your history as a sportswoman. You were the first woman to win the top Sportsman of the Year award, World Sportsman of the Year, Yachtsman of the Year.
Man of the Year.
Did make me laugh. First woman to win. So the irony, you're perfectly qualified to talk about this. This is a report from the British Medical Journal. It's a study carried out basically saying there's no evidence to justify a blanket ban on trans-identified men, let's call them what they are, from competing in women's sport, because they believe that they are, even if they're born male, they have no advantage over women once they start taking cross-sex hormones. Am I not right in thinking that this is the exact opposite of what every bit of proper evidence has ever shown?
Yeah, exactly right. I think firstly to say that any study that has Joanna Harper and Blair Hamilton anywhere near it should be ignored.
Who are they and what is their history?
Joanna Harper is a man who pretends to be a woman, scientist, and Blair Hamilton, I think, is studies at can't remember, one of the Loughborough University, and he's a man that wants to be a play in women's football.
Right.
So
they've got skin in the game, shall we say?
They have got skin in the game, as you say. I'm amazed that the BJSM have published this, but it will be heavily critiqued over the next few days and weeks, quite rightly so. The second thing to say is that this study is a little bit of a sleight of hand, not surprisingly. So it is not one study with a large data set of quality data. It is a hodgepodge collection of 50 small, tiny studies of dubious nature, some of them, that have been sort of cobbled together and cherry-picked by people who have skin in the game to say something which is not true.
I'm shocked, I tell you. We also have to accept that, I mean, again, an awful lot of the medical establishment, the science and the British medical journalism have been, I mean, very overtly captured by the likes of the Stonewall and the trans activists who would argue, no, there's no issue. But I mean, I've spoken to, you'll know her very well, Sharon Davies, particularly about this many, many, many times. And one of the reasons she was so motivated about this was having to compete as a woman against other women, but East Germans and others who had been drugged to the eyeballs, steroids, and, you know, and they basically had a level of strength and ability it was impossible to compete with because they, you know, had these higher levels of testosterone and the like. Now, we know that men who well, they think, pretend, believe, who knows, that they are women, that they can take cross-sex hormones to take down their testosterone levels, but there's been well documented that once you've gone through puberty, you maintain that advantage: height, muscle density, strength, bone density, lung size, the length of your arms, the size of your hands, everything. There are huge male advantages in every sport. Even interestingly, in sort of the city downy sports or the standing up sports, like dots. You're taller. You can throw for longer. You can in every aspect. But they're arguing, look, there isn't an advantage once they've taken these hormones. But am I not right in thinking that actually even once you take those hormones, these men, they don't go down to women's level of hormones, do they? They stay well above what any woman could ever have.
Exactly. And if you're just going to go on drug banning, which of course, Sharon and I are very passionate about her because of the Eastern European situation, obviously, and why we actually started the Women's Sports Union together. If you just look at testosterone, so you can't have women taking any testosterone at all with no testosterone in their body.
That's cheating.
But you can have men who have a little bit of testosterone and kind of that's okay. But you're absolutely right. Even if you take cross-sex hormones for 3 years, as some of these studies have stated, men they never lose the advantages that they have. And testosterone starts at 6 weeks as a fetus in the womb. XY chromosome fetus have testosterone blasted at them. Then, of course, puberty. All the other things that come with puberty, as you've just mentioned. You cannot unboil an egg, is one of Sharon's favourite expressions, that I agree with. And I would say, I've seen this firsthand. And as you said in your introduction, anyone with eyes, it knows this for a fact, is why we have women's sports in the first place and why we fought so hard to
Otherwise, women would never win anything because of the male physical advantage. And we saw something, God, we saw it, didn't it? Just, I mean, I think in a way it did everyone a favour because it's the disgusting sight of men punching women in the face in the boxing finals, you know, at the Olympics. And we've seen, again, the likes of Leah Thomas, again, who's just, call me what you are, mate, you're a cheat. A man who was, you know, 400th in the college racing, became first when he was a man, became first when he was thought he was a woman, walking around dangling his meat and two veg in front of all the women in the changing room. I mean, let's be honest, you know, but also the fact that there is not a single women's record, not one, in any sporting field, whether it's running, cycling, shot put, tennis, there is not a single woman top Olympian record in the world that cannot be broken by the top 16-year-old boys in high school in America. That's how big the difference is.
Exactly. You know, we saw the Americans' professional women's football team and the Swiss women's football team both beaten by under 15 schoolboys. In sailing, so I think I'm right in saying I'm the only woman to have ever raced around the world with an all-male crew.
All-female crew? Weren't you an all-female crew?
And an all-female crew. Yeah. So I can tell you the difference between an all-male crew and an all-female crew while you're racing around the world in the Southern Ocean is shocking. It's awesome. Men's, this explosive power that men have, which, again, getting rid of testosterone and taking cross-sex hormones doesn't get rid of, is truly impressive. The only reason that women can sail around the world on a level playing field with men is that it's not just down to strength, it's down to navigation,
skill,
tactics.
And but again, there is still that advantage. Tracy, I mean, again, another study saying abject nonsense by people who have got, you know, skin in the game, wanting to lie again. They have to lie about it because they know the truth is on our side, not on theirs. I love you, love Sharon Davies for all the fantastic work you're doing. And again, not just women, but also for the athletes coming up younger than you, whether it's a 5-year-old who wants to play netball one day or run, you are protecting girls and women, and I thank you so much for it. Let's talk first of all about schoolgirls being banned from wearing skirts at a school in Bridgend in South Wales. New policy at the beginning of the next school year in September. 1,600 pupils, they're going to be banned from wearing skirts as part of, I don't understand, an equality drive. Can you explain this?
Interesting, isn't it, Julia, that equality means denying girls the right to choose what they wear and forcing them instead to dress like the boys.
Although the boys usually, I mean, boys for years, they weren't allowed the choice. They had to wear trousers.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to give anyone ideas because it's not beyond the realms of possibility that some school might try to force the boys to wear skirts. Yeah. But I think back on when I was at school, and I would have absolutely hated to wear trousers. Girls' bodies are different from boys, and particularly when girls are growing and their bodies are changing, there's a lot more give in a skirt as kids grow up. And they're not doing this in a way that is phasing out the old school uniform either. They're just demanding that the parents immediately buy their girls some trousers.
Yeah, but we know what this is about. This is about trans ideology, trans activists insisting, and telling boys you can dress as if you're a girl. And girls, of course, lots of schools allow girls to wear trousers as an option if they want them as well anyway. But this ridiculous thing. So the solution is, well, we won't have any girls wearing skirts, so no boys don't. So it's all equal. But actually, it's always involved, whenever there's anything about being inclusive and equality, it always involves taking away the rights of women and girls.
Yeah, and this is a point that parents have made in schools where this kind of policy has come in, because they've made the uniform effectively non-binary. They've made it gender neutral, and parents have complained that they're just defeminizing the girls. They're refusing the right of the girls to express themselves by wearing feminine clothing, and it always is the way. It's always, when it comes to gender neutrality, it's always the women that have to give up their spaces, that have to give up their clothes in order to fit with this new progressive paradigm that nobody asked for, by the way.
Oh, yeah, of course not. I'm sure the parents weren't banging on about this. Again, it is just extraordinary. And again, the equality drive. I wonder if the equality drive includes girls getting to go to the toilet without a boy claiming to be a girl being in the toilets with them.
Well, that would, of course, now be against the law, Julia. But as we've seen with lots of institutions across the country, they're just simply unwilling to actually enforce the law, because men are not allowed legally to enter into women's spaces. But there are still some people who are trying to dig their heels in and refusing to allow women to have their sex-based rights.
It is extraordinary that I can't get over that story. April last year, the Supreme Court ruling, done and dusted. The law was the law. It hadn't changed. That was always the law under the Equality Act, and yet we are still fighting battles on that front. This next story, I find this quite encouraging. It's actually kind of the opposite of a woke story. This is the biggest theme park company in the country, Alton Towers. They have decided to change their rules when it comes to getting into the queue for disabled people, and everyone will know you can buy your fast pass, but also if you've got a disability you can basically bypass the queues. You don't have to stand and queue. You can basically queue effectively, you know, online. So yeah, you're in the queue for chairs, but you're not actually having to stand there, which makes sense for people who've got severe disabilities. Of course it does. And why would we not want to help those people to make sure their adults and children could enjoy that? Well, they've decided now, this is Merlin Entertainments, that it will no longer include allowing people with ADHD and anxiety and other lower down, should we say, mental health conditions from claiming a disability or medical condition to basically jump the queue like that. I, for one, welcome this, I'm assuming, because every Tom, Dick and Harry was going, oh, yeah, I've got this, and they were all, so basically, you basically got half the people at Alton Towers jumping the queue.
Yeah, common sense prevails, Julia. As you say, the whole idea is that you have a virtual queue so that those people who are not able to stand in the queue can still be in the queue. But if you have loads of people who are actually quite capable of standing in a queue, joining this virtual queue, then you're just making the queue longer unjustifiably for those people who actually have no choice but to not stand in the queue. So it's a perfect common sense from them. And of course, I mean, they've not gone the whole hog on this. They're still willing to make some kind of concessions for, say, if you have a severely autistic person who has trouble being in crowds. But what they've done is they've made a distinction between those who are unable to stand and those who have difficulty being in crowds. So they'll still make some kind of concessions for people who actually need it. But you have so many people, sort of like exponential growth of people who are being diagnosed with, particularly with ADHD. And there's no reason why somebody with ADHD can't stand in a normal queue, would have to join a virtual queue. What, because they might get bored standing in the queue? They might get
So do I.
I mean, it's everybody does, exactly. So I think it's common sense to not have all disabilities on exactly the same playing field when it comes to what people can and cannot do.
And if only this policy could be actually expanded to government in terms of people's access to benefits and all the extra money and, you know, the Motability cars and all of that, where of course somebody who is, you know, limbless or something might need an adapted Motability car and you know, or you know, someone else, you know, with a disabled child would need a car. Absolutely, we want to help those people, but I'm not entirely sure why. Yes, you've got, you know, I don't know, tennis elbow or anxiety that should be needed. I think we should definitely put whoever's in charge of Alton Towers in charge of our benefit system. I think they might make quite an improvement.
Well, you know, Julia, it's always the way that when ideology meets reality, certain concessions have to be made. And this is a perfect example of that. And actually, this is much, much fairer to those who are actually have a disability who prevents them from being able to stand in the queue. So I do think that this is, like I say, an example of ideology meeting reality and common sense prevailing. So hopefully we'll see a lot more like this to come, maybe in those schools where they're trying to force girls into trousers.
The bubble has burst. Of course, your party leader, well, we just had a speech from the Prime Minister. Well, he's still actually, I think he has finished saying whatever he was saying about other things, but of course everyone was focused on what he was saying about Mandelson. We've also had your party leader giving a speech, and we've got Kemi Badenoch a little bit later giving a speech as well. Talking first of all, though, about the Prime Minister and what he had to say about Mandelson, and basically saying similar things, I think, to yesterday at PMQs, basically that, you know, had he known now, well, then what he knows now, he wouldn't have appointed Mandelson. And, you know, he was asked and he lied, and when we found out he lied, we sacked him. Do you think that Keir Starmer survives this?
No, but I didn't think he was going to survive anyway. I think that this will be the straw that broke the camel's back. Labour MPs are revolting on him. They're disgusted, just as the rest of the country are. And for Starmer to sit there and say that he wasn't aware, well, that's ridiculous, because they vet him and advised him of the links, advised him they'd stayed in touch. So this was a deliberate choice by the PM and shows that he lacks any sort of good decision making, and this is the man in charge of our country.
I mean, this thing, a lot of people are saying, it's the backbenchers who are, on the Labour side who are very unhappy. You could see, a certain amount of glee from opposition party members. But if he did fall, depending on who we would get as an alternative, there isn't likely to be a general election. Your party leader, Nigel Farage, has said a few times, he thinks the general election isn't going to be as late as 2029. I think August 2029 is the latest constitutionally legal date it could be held, obviously following on from a July 2024 election. But he's predicted it could be as early as 2027. What is the scenario in which we do get an earlier election? And would you really want to be facing another Labour leader, or wouldn't it be best for both Reform, Tories and the Greens and the Lib Dems even to be facing basically a sort of wounded, walking wounded Keir Starmer rather than any other Labour leader?
To be quite truthful, Julia, it doesn't matter who Labour put in charge, because they're all part of the same party. They've all supported this PM through his disastrous moves. They've not revolted enough. And for me, Reform UK are the party that are actually leading in the polls, and there's no reason for that not to continue. I think that when you look at the leaders that are on show, people can identify with Nigel Farage. People can't identify with Keir Starmer. They don't know what he stands for. His party aren't united. The country isn't united. It's not even like one wing of his party are happy. Nobody's happy. And so, yes, he has to go, but who they replace him with, there's nobody really that stands out from the front benches, because they've all been complicit in what has so far been a disastrous first 18 months in charge.
Well, of course, we know that one of the reasons why all these leaders are out and about is because we've got these local elections coming up across England. We've got the Senate elections in Wales, where Nigel Farage was this morning, and we've got parliamentary elections, of course, for Holyrood in Scotland. We've also, of course, got a by-election, which we can't talk about because we name a single candidate. We have to name every single one. But in terms of what your party leader has announced today, not only have we had another defection, we've had a guy called James Evans, who has defected from the Tories to Reform. But I mean, he was basically sacked, I think, as part of the whole ousting of Robert Jedrick. But you've also got the announcement of the brand new Reform leader in Wales, Dan Thomas, who seems to me, though, he's got lots of experience in local government, but in Barnet, in North London. Is he the ideal choice?
Listen, I trust in our leader to make the right decisions. He's got a party polling from pretty much nothing up to leading the polls in over 200 polls. Some people have got comments on the different defections. Everybody has their own views, which is fine. We live in a democracy. But I think importantly, if our party leadership have decided that this is the way forward, then we've got to get behind it, because they've not done as bad so far, have they?
Well, we shall wait and see. Let's finally, one of the biggest issues that your party has done very well on has been about the small boat crossings. Nigel Farage was the first politician to get out on a boat in the Channel and talk about it. A lot of other politicians have followed through, and even the Labour Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has absolutely been talking about these legal crossings and wanting to take action. Of course, the gangs are not yet smashed, despite the best efforts of the Prime Minister. But yesterday, in talking to the Home Affairs Select Committee, Shabana Mahmood refused to guarantee the small boat crossings will drop, not even just be ended, be dealt with, but would drop by 2027. That's in a year's time. What did you make of that?
I mean, isn't it depressing? They're not smashing the gangs, they're smashing the records. And I just wonder sometimes whether these politicians that come out with these slogans actually believe that it's going to happen, or then they're just going to reinvent themselves a year later with yet another slogan. And they stand there at the lantern and they say it with chest and they seem to really believe it. But the public see through it. The public can see that it's not happening. And whilst the boat crossings aren't being reported every day like they used to be, it's still the major issue on the doorstep. And people know that Reform are the only party that have got credible plans, including leaving the ECHR, which the Conservatives originally said they wouldn't do. They were reluctant. And that's because you've got a party stuffed full of left-leaning, almost liberal Democrats, whereas Reform are the centre-right of politics. And we are willing to take the steps that are necessary to protect our borders.
You're a local councillor. Are you still happy to have those Tories coming into your party? I think it's a quarter of your MPs, in fact, more than a quarter of your MPs. Half your MPs are ex-Tories, aren't they?
I'm an ex-Tory voter myself, as are millions of people.
Were you a Tory councillor?
So I was a Tory councillor. I left in 2024 when Reform were polling 8%, so I'm quite happy of when I left. But ultimately, A lot of people are ex-Tory voters, but we're attracting voters from all over the place. And if people can join the party and bring a skill set and genuinely believe in our values and principles, then I'm fine with that. But the important thing is they're not just doing it to save their own careers.